really getting risk involved and IP is something that you really want to do right away. And it was very difficult because I also went as well on the FDA website, looked at the MAUDE database, wasn't able to find much about it, and trying to help the manufacturer understand this can't be like this. And, here's why.
Public health. It's on everyone's mind these days, from hand washing to emerging pathogens. Welcome to Transmission Control, an infection prevention podcast focused on your appetite for trailblazing thought, discussion, and innovations that will help you make informed decisions. Each episode, we speak with public health experts and safety champions from across the globe as they share their experiences, passion, and opinions. From investigative journalism to medical publications, we tackle real-world barriers to halting the spread of disease. Whether you are tuning in for education, inspiration, or to hear the stories that need to be told, thank you for joining us. And now, get ready to blast off with your weekly injection of insight on transmission control.
This week on Transmission Control, we speak with Jill Behrens, clinical trainer at AMBU USA, and this conversation is going to be one about patient advocacy, Larry, and really a story about her experience in surgical services, but really when she was working in sterile processing and partnered with infection prevention to, address a contamination risk on a specific device that ended up getting recalled and what that process was like. So it's going to be a very interesting story. Obviously we heard all kinds of stories about patient advocacy, but, from hearing a story within sterile processing, I'm really excited to share this with the audience.
Yeah, I agree. And it underscores how really one of the objectives of this podcast is to hear the stories of patient advocates. So anyone listening who has a story to tell, we would really like to hear it and delve into it, because here's a case of a patient advocate, kind of grassroots operation, who's involved in a recall, a significant and important recall, and kind of hopefully will walk us through from beginning to end. I'm sure she will. I'm eager to hear how the FDA was involved in this as opposed to necessarily the manufacturer. Who did she really go to and who did she talk to? And during today's conversation, we'll be talking about some of the responsibilities and the oversight of infection preventionists, or what we also call IPs.
All right. Well, we're going to get into the story in just a minute. We'll be right back with Jill Behrens after a short break. I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Dr. Lawrence Muscarella.
From 17 Studios, let's get into it. This is Transmission Control.
Joining us now is Jill Behrens, clinical trainer at AMBU USA, and we've got an exciting story for you. And it's one of patient advocacy from within the healthcare system. I'm very excited to talk about this with you today, Jill, and very excited that you're able to share, your experience with others. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Super fun.
Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you've got, a variety of experiences in surgical services, and you're also very involved with APIC. So why don't you talk to us about your broad experience?
Yeah. So I have a little bit of extensive background. I have dabbled in a lot of things, wear multiple hats. It's been an exciting career, and I'm fortunate for the opportunities that have been put in front of me. I've been a surgical tech for about 15 years. And I still actually scrub. I'm grateful the scrub's still kind of here and there. And about 5 years ago, I was able to go into leadership. So I had gone into sterile processing and really became a subject matter expert in the space. I'm grateful for the network that I created through Steris and HealthMark to help me learn. I had started at a really small hospital. And, years ago, it wasn't all the IFUs, and we didn't have the Beyond Clean kind of umpire that we have today to really teach us and educate us where we were out in those little small areas. So I taught and learned myself, and then I was able to jump into leadership. And for the last 5 years, I was program manager for sterile processing. for Allina Health. And it was a great opportunity, had about 13 sites, and we worked on process improvement. And then I was able to, last November, go to AMBU. And I've been the clinical training specialist for them on the urology and ENT line.
So you're very well versed in the urology and ENT line. That's great to hear. But one of the things we wanted to focus particularly on today is this Alvarado knee positioner recall. Can you tell us what that device is? And kind of, I have a fascination and interest for many years in medical device oversight and regulation, as you probably know, and particularly in recalls and how they're kind of effected and how they are monitored, and then, ultimately they're concluded, they're terminated. So can you tell us a little bit about that recall, how that device started, how you became aware of there being a concern? I think maybe I was reading something about how a blog kind of was the initiation of all this, but I don't want to say any more. Just jump right in and tell us about this recall and what it means to you and how it happened.
Yeah, so the Alvarado recall was something that we kind of came by through chance. So it happened, Match Grade Medical was a manufacturer of a knee positioner, and they had actually taken saws and made a YouTube video to take apart the Alvarado knee positioner.
Knee positioner. And what exactly is that? What is this? It positions your knee during surgery? I mean, I can just kind of naively say that.
The physician will take and they will position the knee and they'll wrap it around so it has like a boot, and then it has a base plate that attaches to the bed. And it holds the patient during surgery.
So we would say, is it in the sterile field?
It is in the sterile field. Yep. So you drape everything out, and this is sterile. So it's sterilized. It's cleaned. There's an IFU for it.
It's sterilized and cleaned in central supply per a set of IFUs. Is that correct?
It is. Yes. There was an IFU for it.
So what exactly was not being done right? And maybe you can address a little bit about what those instructions were. I guess they were not adequate, and then we can jump a little bit into FDA oversight of that. But so how did you find this out? You saw some foreign debris on this, or?
After we had seen the YouTube video, we went back the next morning and pulled all of them off the shelf, and we started kind of looking at them closely, taking apart the screws that were connected to that base plate. And we found blood and bioburden line underneath the base plate. So there was two little base plates and then the boot stuck into there. So there wasn't anything that could come apart on the actual boot, but on the base plate there was, and all the screws had like bone and debris in them. So I contacted the manufacturer right away. I had taken pictures. I went through the quality. I talked to the quality control at Zimmer Biomet at the time. I looked up the IFUs. There was kind of an interesting thing that happened. So when you just Google search, I was able to find an IFU that was very basic, that just said hand wash, don't put in the washer. It was really just kind of soap and water. And that was all that was even on OneSource, because we did have access to OneSource. And when you went to Zimmer Biomet and I got talking to the rep who was covering our territory, he actually gave me a new IFU.
Different version,
updated version. An updated version. However, that IFU did not have anything about going through a washer. And I'm a surgical tech, so I understand that this is one of the instrumentations, if you will, that will get all of the debris from the case because we're sawing and we're irrigating. And that base plate is sitting under the legs. So that takes all of the debris and the blood. Everything is going on it. Cement. It's very, very hard to clean that because it comes back so contaminated, if you will, from the case, because it's right there collecting everything.
So one of our principles would be full disassembly in order to clean and disinfect or sterilize.
Absolutely.
But I think I'm hearing from these IFUs, correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe there were some confusion about what exactly to do. Now, this is not what we would consider a critical device. It doesn't enter the patient's vasculature, yet maybe you can just fill us in a little on that, because is this something then that should be sterilized as opposed to disinfected? Is it done after every patient procedure? What is the ideal situation that you wanted to see, and then contrast that with what you actually did see?
Yeah, so this is actually sterilized because it is used on the sterile field during a total joint for a knee. And so we had to have that sterilized. And contrasting that, in the IFU, I would have needed to see it going through a washer disinfector. So we actually went down the avenue to meet with the
regulatory affairs.
Yeah, we met with them, and we also met with the R&D, so research and development at Zimmer Biomed. We talked with them a lot about, can you give us, because again, we wanted to make sure we were following the IFU through this period of what they were going to do. They had given us all new Alvarados, but in the meantime, we knew that they were all going to get dirty, and it didn't have anything in the IFU about taking them apart. So I would have liked to see, and I shared with them, we need to have enzymatic. We have to be able to have enzymatic used on this device. We also need to be able to put it into a washer disinfector. It is very dirty, very contaminated. There is no way that we can, under washing in the sink with just brushes, get this cleaned.
So two questions come to my mind. You said we have to put it in a washer disinfector. So can we envision this as kind of 3 steps where we cleaning manually, putting it in an automated washer disinfector, and then putting it as into a steam autoclave?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's the process.
Yep.
And then, of course, there's this whole issue about infections. Now, I did a search of the FDA's adverse event database, and I didn't see any infections. So maybe you can discuss a little bit of about this. Obviously, if we're seeing foreign material in a sterile field, we have a problem. Had this been linked to infections? Was it none were reported? We think there's some infections, but it was never kind of connected back to this device. What is the significance of this device specifically in terms of causing infections?
Yeah, we had talked a lot about that. So we went to our IP teams. We got our risk teams involved right away when we kind of started going down this avenue of, look what we found. How does this work? They were really supportive. And I'm grateful for the teams, the multidisciplinary teams that we had set up within our organization, because I know that a lot of teams don't have that. So really getting risk involved and IP is something that you really want to do right away. And it was very difficult because I also went as well on the FDA website, looked at the MAUDE database, wasn't able to find much about it, and trying to help the manufacturer understand this can't be like this. And, here's why. So that was difficult for me to be able to track or find any infections.
So what's the critical mass? If the infection is really the impetus for change, was it just that your argument was so convincing and undeniable that there's debris and we're in a sterile field? Or could the manufacturer just say, who cares about that debris? It's sterile debris. It's being steamed autoclaved. So is this much ado about nothing?
Yeah. So they actually took it very seriously, and it took them a long time, but right away they wanted them back. So we couldn't give the Alvarados back per our internal process, and Zimmer started to reach out to ask us more questions. They told us that they were doing kind of a study, and then all of a sudden the recall happened. So they had put out a recall nationwide. I had heard, from several organizations outside of my own that they were looking at getting different replacements, because you have to have something to hold the knee within the total joint.
So we've talked about the manufacturer that you're interacting with, and the two of you are giving each other important feedback, and they're listening to you and adapting and changing. Where's the FDA in all of this? So that's kind of a 2-part question. The first question will be, do these devices require a legal clearance, what we call a 510K pre-market clearance? Do they require one? I did a search. I didn't see one. And if this is something that could become contaminated and pose an infection risk, I would think it would require clearance. So maybe you can address that, and then we can talk a little bit about, does the FDA now require that the manufacturers of these devices provide them, the agency, with the data that show that these can be, the validation data, if you will, that showed that these can be cleaned and washed and disinfected and sterilized. So let's go back to the 510K clearance issue. Did these do not require 510K clearance?
So when I did search it, it did have a 510K number. I was able to ask the manufacturer for a 510K because I did actually want to go back and research. So I was able to find a 510K number. I don't know if they actually had, like, what the background was at. Was it from a predicate device? That type of thing.
Well, I guess we could assume that it is. Okay, so I'm incorrect. I could not find a 510K clearance, and so I'm incorrect. There is one out there. So what about now this issue of the FDA and oversight of these devices moving forward? What changed with, if anything, within the FDA as a result of your very important participation in this recall? Does the FDA require validation now and that the manufacturer has to show that these can be properly reprocessed after each use or no? Is that not going on now? Do you know?
So I know that they are not back on the market. So they took the Alvarado away and it has not yet come back. So what I'm assuming is they had to show the FDA, or to bring the device back, they had to prove through the labs. I do understand that in the labs, they put the testing material on there and they have to prove that the washers or what have you get that off. So I know that they were going through that process, but it still has not come back. Nobody has been able to use the Alvarado leg holder. So I'm assuming that they haven't gotten the right design
they haven't reached
yet.
That threshold yet. Yeah. So what about competitors though? There are other competing knee holders in the market, right? How are they?
Yeah, they come apart. Yeah. So like the Match Grade Medical one, there's a couple other devices that come apart. There's like a slide lock that comes apart. There's several various ones, and they are all able to come apart, whether you can take screws off of them and all of the little rails, they can come apart.
So we don't see this problem with any of the other knee holders.
Correct. We actually took all of our various ones. I think there's 3 different kinds. We took them all apart to make sure that they did not have any other problems or bioburden contained in them.
Interesting. So lessons learned from this experience. Did you ever do everything right the first time? Would you like to do something differently the next time? Kind of what did you learn, and how can we apply your experiences to other medical devices that also could remain possibly contaminated and maybe expose patients to pathogens, not necessarily infect the patients, but at least increase the potential risk? Do you want to discuss some of that, the lessons that you learned?
Yeah. So a couple things that I did learn. I would have involved a couple more people. So like I said, right in the morning, we took all of them off. We were going to clean them. It took way longer than expected. So the physician for the first case did not have an Alvarado leg holder. And that kind of led to a little bit of, I did apologize to him. It just makes the case a little bit harder. So that was a struggle. And so I would have probably not taken all of them. And I would have waited and gone to the directors. I would have probably contacted the physician himself and talked to him. Do you want this one taken down? Do you want to wait for one that's cleaned? That type of thing.
Right. So very good lessons learned. And how can you transfer all this knowledge you now have into the world of flexible endoscopes, which, as you know, certainly more than a knee positioner, have been linked to more hospital infections and outbreaks, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, than any other type of reusable device. What did you learn through this whole recall experience, and how do you apply it now to perfecting endoscope reprocessing and preventing patient exposure to pathogens during a flexible endoscopic procedure?
Yeah, so great question. I really like to educate. So we go into these clinic spaces. They may not have IPs. They may be private practice. And so I first start by partnering and educating. And I also try to always come with standards or some sort of a document so that it's not just my word, it's actually credible material. So that whether the physician or the staff, they can go back and they can look at that, because I think that that's really important when you're trying to build trust in a new account, or, just from being on the hospital side, I understand this dynamic between manufacturers trying to sell you something and being on the hospital side, right? We're kind of like cautiously optimistic. So I try to really provide the nuts and bolts, if you will, of the information. And then I really go through their process. What are you doing today? And are you aware this is what your IFU says of your reusable product? Here's 10 steps that you may have to add, or they may be doing it correct. They may be every Botox needle that goes in might be having a leak. Were they leak testing? Are they finding those leaks, right? Do they know how much repair is needing to happen? Sometimes that all goes to sterile processing and no one knows. So those are the things that I try to talk about and use to help the organizations.
Yeah, thank you. Very thorough answer. And this is a really important question. And Justin, I know you'll have some thoughts on this too. You said that you walk into these facilities, the customers, and you bring with you a standard or a guideline or more than one. And we have kind of a domain issue here where one organization may produce their own guideline. So we have, for example, the GI physicians and the GI Society is producing a multi-society guideline. And then in 2021 on endoscopy processing. And then we go about a year later, and then we have manufacturers through Association for the Advancement in Medical Instrumentation, or AMI, we have them producing or publishing this updated ST91 on endoscopy processing. And then the Association of Perioperative Registered Nurses, or ARN, they're to be coming out with a guideline. So we have all these different guidelines, some of which are providing conflicting advice. So how do you handle that? First of all, what standard or guideline do you like that you carry along with you? And how do you handle when someone points out contradictions in the guidelines?
Yeah. So the first question, I always go with AMI ST91. I think it's the most up to date. It's the most current right now. And so I will start there. One of the questions that I ask to start and just level set the playing field, if you will, is what are your policies and procedures? What's the reference document? So is it CDC? Is it AMI? Are you following an SG&A? Because then I can meet them where the standards are for their organization. Some don't have anything. They don't have any oversight, like when we're thinking about private practice. So there we really have to kind of tread lightly around, do you know that this is available? Do you know that this is kind of what best practice is? Are you aware that this is kind of what the community standard is? Those are some of the things that I try to go with. In private practice, it's hard because, there's not those surveys. There's not that kind of stuff. And it just depends on if it's within the states, how they are then surveyed. Is it every 5 years? Is it 10 years? And that's when they get their licensure for private practice.
Right, and whether it's the state agency inspecting or maybe CMS, the federal organization. So the ST91, is that particular? Do you see anything in the ST91 updated that you might have improved, or that you think is particularly important and well taken, or that maybe you thought maybe could have been worded a little better? Do you want to comment a little bit on that in terms of how you would advise these end users about some of the suggestions?
Yeah, so I do think that the shells, so they did add the word shell, and that has not been. So that really kind of brings in a more requirement. At the beginning, they kind of give the breakdown of required things like that. I do think that, and we always see this where, whether it's AORN or AMI, where we have to keep it a little broad. I really am hoping in the next, updates to these that we get more black and white. I think if I read it or you read it or someone who's a new tech, we all can see it through a different lens or based on our background. I think that is really, really something that every time when the new ones come out, I always hope that it's going to be more black and white than gray.
Can you give an example of where you see gray in the updated ST91?
Yeah, so I think there is some gray zones around cleaning verification. I think there's some gray zones around drying. Like what does that look like? What does hang time look like? It's there, but it doesn't really give us it kind of just like leaves it up to interpretation a little bit.
Did you find it interesting that, and I may not be interpreting it correctly, maybe you can direct me a little this, that the ureteroscopes and the bronchoscopes were listed as critical, but the duodenoscopes were not, despite the duodenoscopes really being associated with more cases of contamination in both patient infection and mortality. So what is going on there?
Yeah, I did find that a little bit strange as well. I am surprised. When I think about that though, I think that there is an opportunity to do a risk assessment, as they state in a lot of areas, create that multidisciplinary, create your risk assessments. And they really are giving us examples of those, critical devices. And so if it was my organization and I was program manager, I would put the duodenoscope into that critical device based on what we know.
They called it, the duodenoscope, a high-risk device along with bronchoscopes and ureteroscopes, but then did not classify a duodenoscope as critical despite it being high risk. And I didn't know what to make of that.
Yeah. And then they also said cystoscopes as high risk too. So there is a lot of kind of contradicting, but I think we're in this space where it's changing very rapidly and the IFUs haven't necessarily advanced to being able to all be sterilized, being able to meet what we kind of all know in the industry is hopefully going to be our standard of care one day, that either we use single-use scopes or we sterilize scopes.
Right. And I know Justin, I can tell Justin's does a very good job of wrapping some of this up. I'm a little confused. If the guideline says bronchoscopes are critical, that means we have to sterilize. And for facilities that are still high-level disinfecting, a device that the guideline says we need to sterilize, that can create some confusion.
It does create some confusion. The one thing that I know organizations will always go back to is, does it say shall, should? And what I did see was that it said should. So that would be one of those recommendations. And so it gives them a little bit of wiggle room, which is kind of tricky. That's where I really hope that we get to more of a black and white zone, because I think if you read in some areas, it says critical and sterile from what we know. And then when you get to other areas, it's like, well, you could high level disinfect, or that's what we do every day with duodenoscopes or bronchoscopes.
Yeah, I feel like we should title this episode "Shall versus Should," right? And
Yes.
that really does.
Yes.
It's where the gray area kind of plays around. It's like, oh, are we firm on this? No, we're not firm. Okay, let's go with the softer language. Oh no, we're firm. We all agree on this. Let's make this one more hard and fast. And I can really appreciate shall versus should in this whole recall conversation, right? Because if you see an opportunity to improve patient care because there's something that clearly is an infection, prevention risk or an infection control risk, that's a shall. You shall take action. And I can see where sometimes people just aren't really encouraged, to do that. And so I think your story to really, help empower the folks out there that, see something, say something, right? It's the same kind of concept. And so I also like, though, that the way that you worked with the manufacturer. I mean, I think having that conversation and that open dialogue and explaining that, and, there's a world where a manufacturer doesn't take that necessarily seriously from one location. Right. And I think the way that you advocated in this scenario through the organization and with the manufacturers are really, really important. I wanted to ask you one last question, though, because you said you kind of lead with education. And, for the IPs out there, I really want to kind of, tie this one piece together for them. And, when I was working after I left nursing and started working for a supplier and, kind of came from the other side of the table, as they like to say, I've really focused on education as well. And I felt like I was able to speak from, the day to day, right? Like I'm a clinician. I understand that. So when I would educate, I really felt I was educating from a different place, so to speak. But how often when you go in, are you engaging IPs to help schedule and set up that education? Or are you working more side by side with the department leaders themselves and the educators that might be associated to a department? Because what I see happening now is the shortage of staff means the elimination of educator. They're not a hands-on function and they're going away. And I can see a trend where IPs almost, because to have to know so much about so many different things, and some IPs aren't comfortable in surgical services and some IPs are, but maybe not in another area. So, leveraging some of these partnerships to come in and deliver education, it's not necessarily the IP's job to schedule educations like an educator would within a department, but they may not always feel comfortable with the amount of education or the level of detail that they need to educate on potentially. And so I can see them leaning more, on various partners in the industry. How often do you schedule or work with IPs to do that education component?
Yeah, so it really depends on the organization. If there's IP oversight over that clinic or that area, or if we can even kind of get a hold of the names of who that is. I really, because I do come from sterile processing and I think that the IPs are sometimes the cornerstone of that. I really do try to reach out to the IPs, include them, even just, are you aware, right? It's not I want you to know, I want the staff like, I got you. It's not that. It's really, you need more support, right? And I've been there when the IPs kind of can come down and say, they need some more equipment or we need to move to this. It really is support. IPs can give a lot of support.
All right. So they can almost enhance the importance of your education by participating in that. That's fantastic and very sound advice. Jill, great job, not only with this interview, but in telling the story and having really helped impact and improvement in the industry. Hats off to you. And I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you. And I hope if anybody's out there that sees anything that is a little bit contaminated or you're seeing something, just be brave. I know it's really hard. I've been there. Just speak up. Go to your risk teams, go to your IP, go to your leaders. It takes some time and keep pushing. Just keep pushing.
Is there any technology in particular you'd like them to start looking at or you think could be the next recall around the corner?
I got to be careful. I got to be
Fair
careful
answer.
since I'm on the device side. But there are some.
There's some out there. So you've given them a good hint and they can do some investigative work and find it out for themselves.
There definitely are. And I'm kind of still working in my own avenues, if you will, to just try and see. Are we okay there or are we not?
That's excellent. That's brave. And we need that. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time.
Pleasure finally meeting you.
Thank you.
That was Jill Behrens, clinical trainer at Ambu USA. And Larry, what a great story of patient advocacy and really kind of overcoming, maybe some obstacles. I like how she gave some advice for ways that she might have approached it differently in the future. And, even just in terms of internal dynamics and bringing it forward. But at the end of the day, I think the right outcome is what happened here. And it had a lot to do with somebody identifying an issue and being willing to speak up.
Right. So I'll tweak what you said a little bit. I think the outcome is obviously we're striving toward to have identified a gap, some type of medical device. In this case, we're talking about a knee positioner that could remain contaminated, and this could pose a risk. But usually you kind of envision this as being a top-down, where with recalls, it's an FDA recall. The FDA did this. The FDA said that. And here's a great example of someone working in the trenches who initiated the recall in doing her own research. This I would call kind of a bottom-up recall. And I think that is really, really important because these people in central supply, they're really seeing all this. And I think she's pointing out that while the end is the most important, means are crucial to the end. And if you build alliances and work with people to get to that end, you're going to be much more proficient and much more productive than maybe alienating the forces that could ultimately help you achieve the end you seek.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support Transmission Control by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. You can also find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or simply search for Transmission Control on your favorite podcast application. You can also access bonus content for certain episodes, but you got to download our smartphone app for iPhone or Android. And while you're there in the app marketplace or the App Store, we'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review, because your feedback's important to us here at the show. On behalf of Larry and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Transmission Control.